Star Trek Picard, Season 3, Episode 9, Vox. Deanna, Jack, and the Red Door, and pretentious music. That's how this starts out. I was half expecting to see Picard's mother hanging on the other side of that door when Deanna looked in, because this looks pretty much like the plot from Season 2, at least in this scene. The vines were probably playing on the whole Picard family vineyard thing, but they're supposed to be, I guess, neurons, but they really represent connections, well, within the collective, let's be honest, because as it turns out, Jack is a Borg.
Sort of.
God. How exactly was Jack born a Borg? As it turns out, Picard never had Irumodic syndrome. None of the doctors in the last 30 years have noticed that the DNA in Picard's brain was irregular and wasn't consistent with Irumodic syndrome. I guess all of them were incompetent, including Beverly.
This whole explanation that I guess you haven't gotten into yet is ridiculous. I do not understand. I watched it 2 times over, this one explanation. I don't know what they're talking about.
Because they're talking bullshit. If Jack is born with this Borg crap in him, the Borg DNA must have been in other parts of Picard's body, because they say it's not nanites or anything like that. So it wasn't robotic swimmers that were heading for Beverly's egg. There must have been Borg DNA in his nutsack to produce Jack. I don't think they thought this through, at all.
This whole concept of organic Borg. This is what they tried to do a few episodes ago when they said that Picard was, an artificial human?
Mm-hmm.
Those two things are antonyms. If you're going through normal human reproduction, how does that work? Can't just be in the brain. They must have changed the DNA all in his body. But what does that mean? What does an organic Borg component or an organic Borg receiver mean? I don't know what that even means. The explanation they were giving was a bunch of as bad technobabble as you've ever heard on, let's say, Voyager, because I think Voyager was the biggest offender of technobabble. This puts Voyager to shame when it comes to, listen to this bullshit we're going to push out right now. They were bringing up schematics, and you had Worf explaining some of this science-y stuff, and science is in quotation marks. Worf explaining some of this. When we get to this later, I'll wait to the analysis. I've got loads of problems even looking at this at face value of what this is saying, but go ahead and continue, because I could go on for minutes and minutes talking about this bullshit.
Picard tells Jack he's part Borg, and it's all Picard's fault because Picard isn't done apologizing yet. It makes me wonder if these writers have some serious daddy issues, because why is this still a thing? Apparently, everything Picard ever did was wrong, and he's having to apologize even after he's dead. Well done, that's great writing. Picard tells Jack he's sending him to Vulcan for treatment. Jack says he's not going, and tries to leave. Security's outside the door. Jack takes over security with his mind powers.
How does that work? When we were speculating the Pa Wraith situation here, last episode when Jack was in, they were in sick bay or whatever, and he was taking over a bridge person way up there on the bridge. And we were speculating because of the eye color that this is a Pa Wraith thing, a Deep Space Nine thing, which we were complaining if they did do that, it would be a Deep Space Nine follow-up, not a Next Generation. But you know what? At least with the Pa Wraith, there's a supernatural component. The fact that this is Borg, and only Borg, organic Borg, whatever that means. So what was Jack doing all this time? How does he take over people like that? Because last episode, it looked like his spirit or something would go up and take over the controls of somebody. So how does this work?
Jack gets to a shuttle, he leaves the Titan, and heads out to the Borg Queen. Data says they couldn't track Jack because Jack must be jamming his transponder, which would have made a lot more sense if he was to disable his transponder, but whatever, that considering all the problems with this, that's like the least of what awful things happened
But
in this
that's
episode.
more of this techno crap, this technobabble that is nonsensical. You either disable your transponder or you don't. You don't jam it. Do they understand what a transponder is?
No. Now to explain this stupid Borg crap. Years ago, on a show called Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict, there was an episode where people were unknowingly getting medical procedures done on them while they were using a transporter system. In Picard, people were having Borg DNA taken from Picard's dead body, inserted into their own genetic code when they would use the transporter. It only affected people under 25 because their brains are still developing, so all the wrinkly people, they were left unaffected. Which I guess is like the opposite of something like a show like Jeremiah, where all the people of a certain age died, left only the children. Apparently that's how Jack was able to take these people over, because with the Borg DNA, even though it wasn't activated so they were assimilated, they were all networked already, so he was able to reach out and control these people.
They were networked with DNA pieces. Somehow there is a mixture you can do to DNA that will allow you to transmit and receive collective information. Somehow.
Well, didn't you know it's like Gilligan's Island? You get two teeth pushed together and all of a sudden you can receive radio transmissions.
Gilligan, when he got smacked in the mouth and his tooth changed and he was able to pick up radio stations, makes more sense than what they were doing here.
This brings us to the plot of Battlestar Galactica. Both versions, the older one and the newer one.
But the newer one, oh my gosh, was there so much stolen. Terry must love Ronald D. Moore's Battlestar Galactica.
Like in Galactica, the Federation ships have all been networked. They can be centrally controlled. Picard and Shaw try to warn Admiral Shelby, who we all know from TNG when Picard was assimilated. Because it's Frontier Day, all of the networked ships are going to be in one place, which makes it really easy for the Cylon to take them over and attack. What do you think happens? Shaw and Picard contacted Admiral Shelby too late. The Borg send out a signal, and all of those infected Starfleet officers and ensigns and everybody else who's under 25 who's been through the transporter system, they immediately assimilate. All at once, the Borg have control of them and all of these networked ships.
The networked ships, it was explained, and maybe I misheard because my brain was trying hard to shut down because it was trying to protect itself. They were implementing this technology. I think she was calling it like fleet formation. The goal meaning, I guess, so the ships could work in unison to be a more effective fighting force. I think that's what they were implementing here. But if you replace Frontier Day with decommissioning the Battlestar Galactica ship in Ronald D. Moore's Battlestar Galactica, the miniseries that started off the whole series, there are so many parallels to what they're doing here, including their solution, which Molly hasn't covered yet. However, we talked about this 4 or 5 episodes ago. We suspected Terry Matalas was going to rip off Ronald D. Moore's Battlestar Galactica this exact way. We predicted this 4 or 5 episodes ago, what he was going to do. We didn't get any advanced screenings, and that's what he did.
That's because it was very predictable. Anyone on the ships who is over 25 or not assimilated for whatever reason, they're all killed. Picard and friends have to fight their way off the Titan. Geordi's daughters are both assimilated and they're left behind. Shaw gets killed. Picard and the TNG people escape in a shuttle. They go to Geordi's museum, where he's been restoring the Enterprise D for the last 20 years. It isn't networked, much like the Battlestar Galactica.
It predates all that, which we predicted when they were talking about this weird super cell tower crap that the Federation had. I went off on a bit of a mini rant on one of our reviews talking about doing just such a thing. They were going to pick the Enterprise D because it predates all this technology, just like the Battlestar Galactica was able to survive the Cylon meddling with the programming, with their little networking defenses. They ripped off the premise of new Battlestar Galactica Ronald D. Moore.
For some reason, Geordi has a bunch of missiles stockpiled at the museum. I don't even know what to do with that one.
We had a cloaking system earlier, so I guess that museum is like a battle fortress or something.
They start loading all of those missiles onto the Enterprise D.
Just like when the Battlestar Galactica, when it was being decommissioned, and it had to find weapons, so it found that weapons depot, and it was loading up all the weapons. This is so ripping off Battlestar Galactica. I assume, maybe I'm wrong, Trekkies, do you guys watch other science fiction properties, or are you so narrowly focused on Star Trek? I have not seen anybody else, other than talking about the Cylon connection. Do you not see the parallels with the miniseries that started Ronald D. Moore's Galactica? Because I haven't heard anybody else talking. It's not just a little, oh, there's some little nuances. No, Terry's ripping off the premise of Ronald D. Moore's Battlestar Galactica as far as how the whole thing got started, the decommissioning of the Galactica, all those old weapons that were in the museum now, which everybody was offended by, going back to this show and nobody wants the fat Enterprise anymore. This is ripping off Battlestar Galactica. If you didn't see it, you don't have to watch the whole series. Go watch the 2-part miniseries that started the whole thing off. Watch that. Not the whole miniseries, am I saying they ripped off. Watch the premise about the Battlestar Galactica decommissioning, what the Cylons did to breach the defenses of the colonial fleet, and the solution on how Galactica was able to battle the Cylons, an old, beat-up warship, how it was able to survive Cylon attacks when the other more modern Battlestars couldn't. It's the same freaking story, those elements. Now, all the other stuff, the 12 colonies and all that, yeah, that's not the same. But the premise, Frontier Day, Battlestar Galactica Decommissioning Day, the parallels are ridiculously close.
Once they've got their missiles all loaded up, they take their museum ship and they head for Earth. That's what happened in this episode. There was some extra stupid stuff like Jack and his interactions with the Borg Queen. We didn't get to see her face, so I don't know if this is Agnes or not, but it didn't sound like her. Whatever. I cannot believe... Well, I can. Because, again, it was predictable. That we predicted this. I think in episode 5 that this was how this was going to go.
As soon as we knew about the museum, we knew immediately, snap finger, point at screen. They're going to do a Battlestar Galactica ripoff where only the old ship, which has older technology that hasn't been compromised, that's how they're going to win the day. And sure enough, that's what they did. Terry ripped off Battlestar Galactica. Not just the Cylons, but more than just the Cylons. He did rip off the Cylons too, by the way.
Because Jack is a Cylon. He is one of those fleshy Cylons.
I don't know if we're ready yet to talk about some of the technobabble that was in this, or do you still...
Oh, go right ahead, because that was the plot of this episode.
When they were trying to explain how the transporter was changing the DNA of people to put these organic pieces in them. Now, maybe the transporter has always worked like this, so somebody who's actually very well versed in Trek technology, feel free to give me a better explanation, because maybe I never understood transporter technology. But what they were claiming in this episode is the way transporters work is there is a common pattern, I guess I'll say, that is the same throughout all human beings. So the way I always assumed a transporter worked, a Star Trek transporter, is it broke down each individual's matter into a very unique signature pattern and then reassembled it on the other end. What they're claiming that happens now, and maybe again it's always happened this way, I just didn't pay attention, is it's not taking your whole energy pattern breakdown. What it does is it converts you to energy, it knows the common pieces all human beings have. It reassembles the common pieces first and then your own unique pieces around that. And what I would argue, if that's how transporter technology works, I think the people they're reassembling on the other end, they've just killed those people and reassembled them with a different technology. And this is no different than my argument about this Robo-Picard that's walking around. How can you reassemble an individual on the other end by always assembling this common piece first? Because that's what the Borg changelings did. They infiltrated the transporter technology and they said, we're going to muck with this common piece that's always reassembled for any being transported. You would reassemble those pieces first, and then whatever's left over, I guess, of the individual, you would wrap around that. I would argue that kills the person, and the concept of self no longer happens, and who you're reassembling on the other end is a completely different individual than who originally stepped into the transporter.
Well, if that's the case, that's horrible. I don't understand how people can watch this and still think that this is the same Star Trek that we used to have back in the 90s. This is just getting ridiculous with putting their own personal spin on things. Because they're taking things and changing the way that they work, and that changes everything, like you just said. And I still would like to know, maybe I zoned out, but did they actually address Picard's body? Like, did they actually state that it blew up with the Shrike?
I'm assuming it did, but we said that last week, which is horrible, by the way, because they didn't bother to take it back for a proper burial, but they don't care. And if this transporter thing is allowed to stand, how does that work? I don't know. I don't understand how people are enjoying this series. And I think this episode and next week's, I think that's what they're showing at select IMAX theaters. And all I can say is wonderful. Get this material out there to as many people as possible. Give tickets away if you can. Because anybody who is paying attention to what's going on should watch these IMAX things and be repulsed by Terry Trek and what Terry Trek is doing. If you're a Trekkie that doesn't know about new Battlestar Galactica with Ronald D. Moore, I call it new because even though it was 20 years ago, there was another version of that in the 70s. But if you don't know about Ronald D. Moore's Galactica, I guarantee you older mainstream audiences are. So if you're not catching the ripoff, they're going to catch it. So by all means, get this IMAX production out there. Absolutely.
I thought that the CGI, when they were having those Frontier Day celebrations with the fireworks, looked bad.
And that's on our 40-some inch television. When that's on IMAX, that's going to look so bad. It looked bad on our 40-some inch television. It looked like in the old days when they had really cheap green screen compositing with the fireworks going off, it looked really bad, and that was on our little TV. That's going to look so bad on a giant IMAX screen. By all means, try to get as many people as you can to attend this IMAX production if you really want people to know how bad Terry Trek is. This episode was bad. This was, I would argue, though not only the worst of the season, but possibly the worst of all three. When these ships were being compromised and they were forming these pods of fleets or whatever, I was reminded, first I thought maybe the ships, because the camera panned out and they were forming shapes. Ships were forming like shapes of things. At first I thought they were spelling something, which I was going to laugh so hard. If they were going to do that, I was thinking of like 1980 Flash Gordon at the end of the movie when the Hawkmen in the sky formed Thanks Flash, which by the way, I would rather watch that. That movie makes more sense than Terry Trek. But that's what I thought they were doing with those ships. And the CGI for those ships, the collection of ships, looked horrible. People who say this is so different than the previous two seasons of Picard. Really? This looked any different than those copy-paste starships from season 1 with the Attack of the Killer Flowers. Really? When the octopus was trying to push its way, the Borg octopus or whatever that thing was, through our universe. Really? I looked, there were little variations in the type of ships, but as far as just being a bunch of crap pasted on the screen together, This was no different than that scene from season 1, the flower battle. It didn't look any different. It looked bad.
I did catch where they said that no one had seen a Borg in 10 years. How long has it been since the last season?
Ag Borg and her mission, I guess it's been over 10 years? Well, we're not going to talk about that. Yes, you are. You are going to talk about this, Terry Trek. If Rafi's on this crew, then you're talking about Ag Borg.
In season 1, they had that Borg cube, and all of those people who had been assimilated. You're telling me that that was 10 years ago in this timeline.
Ag Borg would be 10 years ago, because that's the last season that we had Borg interaction. Season 1, I'm assuming, was further than that, but who knows? Time in this series probably doesn't work in a linear way. If you forget season 2 and say, look, season 2 eating car batteries, garbage. Okay, I wish I could just do that. But in season 1, there were Borg, so was that 10 years ago?
And Picard is just the most special Borg ever, that those people who were assimilated later than he was, none of them had those brain changes.
I guess those changes didn't happen unless you were activated. I don't know. They never really explained. Those stuff was latently sitting in your system, and somehow I guess because the Borg were returning, the collective, whatever messaging was in the collective, was it activating them? Like, I don't know. I have no idea how any of this was supposed to work. I have no idea. And I'm going to say this again, because this is a sore spot for me. First Contact retconned the Borg. The Borg never had a queen up until then. So when Picard encountered the Borg, that was a collective. There was no queen involved. Why did they pick Picard in Best of Both Worlds? The collective explained this. It's not me interpreting what they said. They said human beings, they need a hierarchical structure. And they're going to have trouble, the Federation, doing what the Borg want because a collective is too much for them to understand. So they chose the strongest ship in the Federation, in Starfleet, and the leader of that strongest ship to be their voice. That's why they called Picard Locutus. This whole thing about the Borg Queen in this episode, Jack, you are Vox. You are not just the person speaking, you are the voice. That was so ridiculous. The retcon, I understand through Voyager and First Contact, this Queen stuff. You know what? I don't like the Next Generation movies. I'm just going to say it. I don't like them. One of the reasons is the Borg Queen. I think she's a horrible idea. Back when Picard got assimilated, there was no Borg Queen. There was none. You're not going to retcon the Queen back then. She didn't exist back then. It was just the collective. So all this other crap you're doing, to me, it's embarrassing yourself. And then when Dr. Crusher was trying to explain how this organic Borg stuff worked, and she was using some sort of bee analogy, when Picard later was talking to Jack, Molly found this out. She pointed it out to me. What was it you pointed out in the background that was happening when Jack was talking?
Well, the honeycomb design on the wall. I don't know why they're obsessed with the Borg now being like bees, with a queen and a hive and a hive mind. Now, even with that honeycomb in the background. Again, when you go over the top with details like that, it just really comes off as cheesy. And I just have to say, I guess Jack is Gaius Baltar. He didn't know he was a Borg. Instead of a red dress, he had a female voice coming from behind a red door. They had these women in their heads. I guess we should just be glad that her name isn't number 6. But the parallels, I don't know how you can't see them.
It's funny because in season 2, who was the actor that played Picard's dad?
Gaius Baltar.
Gaius Baltar. That was signs they were going to rip off Galactica back then. But Terry Trek's a new direction. It's a new direction. Terry Trek sucks. Terry Trek is garbage. It is. It's garbage.
There are no original ideas here. Not a single one. Everything in this season has been a ripoff of something else. There are some people out there who will say, well, it's all been done before. Everything is just an amalgamation of everything else. Sure, why not? However, This is definitely just ripping off pieces of other stuff that's been popular within the last 20-ish years, trying to put them back together in a Frankenstein way to create something new. You gotta know when to stop. You can't take all of these different pieces and shove them together and expect people to be like, hey, that's great. No, I mean, I can look at this and see all of these different pieces belong to something else. If you're going to do something like this, just take a piece here and there and stitch it together well with some of your own stuff. But this is, again, I wonder if AI could have written something better. The coherence in this really wasn't there.
It makes you wonder if they did type this in ChatGPT. Give me a story, a Star Trek story that represents science fiction for the past 25 years. And it just happened, ChatGPT, to draw heavily on Battlestar Galactica because in the early 2000s, that was the big science fiction property. The thing is, the Enterprise D reveal. If that would have been done a different way, because I was telling Molly, the very last episode of Babylon 5, you had Captain Sheridan, he was close to death. And this was 20 years after the events of the series. And what he was doing is he was taking a tour around the galaxy of things that he was familiar with. Actually, he specifically went to Babylon 5. Babylon 5 was getting ready to be shut down. He was walking around and, looking at the station and remembering things. And the Sleeping in the Light, I think was the episode name. That was a very powerful episode, very powerful way to end the series. If they would have had Picard without any of this background crap, just he knows he's near death or he's getting close to the end of his lifespan. He visited the museum, he visited Geordi, he wanted to just kind of push up some member berries, and Geordi's like, well, look, for an exhibit, I reassembled a Galaxy-class starship of that era. And then Picard walked through and was having memory. I might have gotten on board with that because I could see how they were trying in their own way to be respectful, sort of, on the bridge of that ship, and I wanted to feel something, but I didn't. And then that joke Picard made about the rug. I guess some people are defending that, saying, no, that's a dig at new Trek people who don't like the aesthetic of the old stuff. To me, it just felt like it's more slapping in the face of old school Trekkies. And that's what this series has done throughout most of it, is just slapped me across the face every single episode. The even number ones at least make me laugh. The ones with the penguins that are even numbered, I'll laugh through it. Episodes that are odd numbered, or specifically this one offended me on a level I can't even put into words. This was horrible. What this reminded me of, to go back to what Molly was saying, if you've seen the second Back to the Future movie, remember the 80s bar? Remember when they got everything kind of mishmashed wrong in that bar? That's what this is. It's taking Star Trek, trying to fit it in with some other science fiction that was popular, and saying, look, here it is. I don't know if people are not figuring out there is absolutely zero new in this series. This is doing nothing to move the franchise forward. I do not understand at all what people are defending, because I've seen people ponder online. They have said, what if Terry sticks the landing? What if he really sticks the landing here? And by the way, this is not going to stick the landing after episode 9. But even if I assume episode 10 is the best thing I've seen in 25 years, that still does not make up for 9 episodes of garbage. This series is a failure no matter what happens next episode, because I had to waste how many hours watching this garbage, even if they give us the one good episode next week. And I don't think they are going to give us a good episode next week. The only good thing that happened in this episode is Shaw died. I was so, maybe happy is a mean thing to say, but the actor didn't die, just his character. I hate Shaw. He represents everything bad about what this series, what this franchise is now. I've heard people defend Shaw as saying, well, what Shaw's doing is filling in for the actual Trekkie who was watching all this ridiculous stuff and all this secret hideout Trek. If that's what they were doing, they failed. All he is a jackass. He offers nothing. People have compared him to Captain Jellicoe. He's not anything like Captain Jellicoe. Captain Jellicoe, he was competent. The reason he was an interesting change of pace was he wanted to do things different than Picard, but he still knew what he was doing. He just did it differently. Shaw is incompetent. I've heard people say, I like Shaw just because he's an asshole. These people want to hang around assholes? And then I've heard them follow up, yeah, just like Captain Jellicoe. Yeah, that guy wasn't even really an asshole. You don't know what you were watching. He wasn't an asshole in The Next Generation. He just did something differently that rubbed people the wrong way. Shaw is incompetent. When he died, and then that as he was dying, he called Seven by her proper name, and then he just died, and I'm like, I laughed when that happened. It was such a ridiculous death, but I was so glad Shaw is no longer a problem. And for all you people who wanted Captain Shaw the Titan series, looks like that's not happening. Too bad.
This is Secret Hideout Star Trek.
Yeah, no
I
Terry
don't care
Trek.
who's in charge.
No Terry Trek or Bob Trek. Terry Trek gets on the out, so they hire some other puppet to stick in there. It's still Secret Hideout Trek. It doesn't matter what face you put on the front of it. Take your baseball cap with Terry Trek and throw it in the garbage. It'll be right along with the material, right in the garbage. I am so grateful. I believe next week is the last episode ever of Star Trek Picard. It's the last episode we will have to watch this garbage and watch these characters embarrass themselves. And I'm grateful for that. I am starting to notice with people online. I noticed a couple of days ago, I watched a YouTube video and somebody stated, you know, I watched episode 1 of season 3 again. I just watched it the other day. It wasn't nearly as good as I remembered it. And I've been saying all along, that's what people are going to start doing once the series ends. Give a little bit of time to pass where the hype dies down. Rewatch it. On rewatch, this series fails. It fails. People are getting so caught up in their emotions, seeing all these people together, the LCAR systems, ships that kind of look like Next Generation ships, and they're getting all worked up. They're calling it, well, it's not perfect, but no, it's garbage. On rewatch, you'll notice it's not only not perfect, it's garbage.
So in the final episode, do you think it will be Robo-Picard, or will it be Jack, who play the role of Spock and sacrifice themselves while saying the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one?
I don't know.
Who's it gonna be? Who's it gonna be? Which one will it be?
When we were watching this, and they revealed the Borg, what that reminded me of was JJ's second movie, that Into Darkness, when Cumberbatch said, I am Khan. And it was so over the top stupid because he was pulling member berries down and shaking them in your face. That's what this was. I expected Cumberbatch, his face to like overlay and go, I am Khan. Stop supporting this stuff. It's embarrassing. You should be embarrassed supporting this stuff. If you really enjoy Star Trek, how can you watch this? It is minimizing every episode that airs. It makes it harder to watch The Next Generation. I know. I've tried. I have so much trouble trying to rewatch Next Generation. Luckily, one more episode, this crap is done. And maybe in a year or two, when my memory fades on it, I can go back to The Next Generation and just forget all this happened. Terry Trek was the perfect cherry to put on top of this sundae. He took this garbage, said, I'm going to still make garbage, but I'm going to put member berries in there, and there you go. And people, if you want to live in the past and just get mashups of what came before and other science fiction shows, our society, Western culture, I can see why we're getting ready for a great fall. Because art is usually a good example of when a culture has nothing to offer humanity anymore. We, in the Western world, have nothing to offer the world in our current configuration anymore. We don't. This is a sign of the times we live in. A hard fall is getting ready to happen.
Well, I don't know what to say about that. This episode was predictable. Obviously, we predicted this several episodes ago. I think the only way somebody could like this is if they haven't seen Battlestar Galactica, or they loved Battlestar Galactica so much that they just love seeing it again. But this isn't original. Like the old man said, this is just more character assassination. This isn't good. This isn't clever. It's not original at all. It's just copy and paste from other franchises that were better. I'm glad that this is about to end because, again, I don't understand how people can think this is good. Well, now that we've said all of that, comments below, everyone. You know what to do, and we will talk about this. Obviously, we will be watching this nightmare next week so that it can finally end.
Take care.